sports. Let's say, like, how many high school kids are in our school? What's the number of kids in high school? Like 10 to 12?
250.
250, let's say, roughly. 500?
No, we have like 300 people.
We don't have 500 in our whole school, let alone high school, okay? So like, making a team in our school is challenging. We just barely have enough people to make teams, right? Imagine we went up against a school with 1,500 kids in high school, right? Let's say the comp, what's up? It would be a challenge, right? Like the talent you're picking from is dramatically different, man. Just the way you got that hand on. Like, that's what you were doing, man. That's what you were doing.
On the YouTube.
That's what you were doing, man. Stop that.
Bro, the history is getting to him.
The history, man, maybe I'll get canceled, hopefully, right? So stratified competition would mean, like, let's say you have like in 10 teams, 3 of those teams are from schools with like over 1,500 kids, and 3 of those teams are from schools with like 125, 300 kids in high school, right? Like some teams have significantly less talent to pick from, and it's going to be hard for them to compete, right? And that's what I mean by stratified competition. So how might an underdeveloped country protect itself from strong corporations or governments, right? So if you're a place, let's say in Africa, and you have a lot of valuable minerals and resources, but there's not a lot of infrastructure, so you don't have any government, you don't have a lot of trade structure as well. How do you protect yourself from a big company just coming in and saying, hey, you know what, we're just going to buy this land, we're going to have a 100-year contract to own this land and this mine, and we're going to make as much money off it as we can? And you know, how do you protect yourself against that? It's very challenging, right? Now, one response to that is that some jobs are better than no jobs, right? Some development is better than no development. And other people might say that, no, this is, what's the word? You're taking advantage of these countries and you're not benefiting them. And it's kind of a reiteration of the colonialism that existed 200 years ago. Like, you just go in there now and you take stuff out of there for your own benefit and you leave nothing for the locals. You're just doing what people did 200 to 400 years ago, right? So there are these competing ideas there. Right? Someone had their hand up.
Yeah.
What's up? I knew he was going to be going to the washroom. Go ahead. Okay. Loss of skills. So if all your production and manufacturing is done elsewhere, rebuilding that industry can be incredibly challenging. We had this issue during COVID. We had to rely on different countries to provide us masks, to provide us medical equipment, to provide us a variety of things that we no longer could manufacture and make ourselves. Part of the challenge with that is that if you haven't done that in a long enough time, you lose that skill, right? So imagine, what's up? You look shocked.
No.
You lose the expertise, is what I'm trying to say, right? So like, what would happen to a school that doesn't have a, let's say, basketball or volleyball team for like 5-10 years in a row? Well, yeah, like when you come back, your team's probably going to be bad. You might not have any coaches who played recently, right? How that might work on a country scale is that maybe you have no factories to do manufacturing, and you have nobody willing to do those jobs. And when you do have people willing to work those jobs, they don't have the skill set to actually work in those factories and manufacture those things, which for you is like way above your kind of world, because like, how many of you could make a shirt? No, I'm not talking about just about stitching, right? So you could stitch together a shirt, right? But do you know how to grow?
I think if I was taught, I could do it.
But who would teach you, right? That's kind of the problem here, right? If there's no one with that skill anymore because we haven't done it in 50 years, right? So that's one of the challenges as well, right? So if you open up the rest of the world, you give all your manufacturing elsewhere, you lose that skill yourself.
Don't you just shave a sheep, like kill a sheep, get all the stuff, and then bang, shirt.
I'll just YouTube.
There's a couple of steps in between bang, right?
Yeah.
Right? Hopefully it's simple. Some things aren't as simple, right? Okay. During times of great need, becoming over-dependent on others for manufacturing creates gaps in the supply side of things. So again, that's another something that we learned with COVID, right? we couldn't manufacture some of these things ourselves, and there was a big need, and getting them from the other side of the world was very challenging, right? And there are still some of these challenges that exist today. Okay, what are some benefits that a country might experience when having more access to trade, therefore globalization? Well, you have cheaper goods. Like, how many of you can buy a shirt for like $5? You ever seen shirts for like $5? They're cheap, right? Right, you might see large packs like 30 socks for $10, right? So we have access to cheaper goods. Food as well. Food is still relatively cheap.
Walmart has like specials. Just plain shirts for like $5.
Right?
Clutch.
They're mass produced and they're produced elsewhere, right? So you have access to cheaper goods. There might be more jobs, which can equate to less poverty, right? So all of us live very, even the worst amongst us live better lives than the best in some parts of the world, right? And even if you don't make a whole lot of money, well, you still have access to an infrastructure that works, right? Like the lights turn on, the water's clean, right? You have a police force that protects you, right? You have roads that are very useful in education system. But here people can get jobs relatively easily, which means you can earn some money, which keeps you out of poverty. But imagine if there were no jobs, or there was half as many, right? And there's more people who are not working. So having more trade liberalization gives you, more jobs, less poverty, hopefully, right? More access to nutrients and healthcare. So again, for us, the variety of nutrients we get in winter. So in winter, you can still get all the fruits that you would eat in summer. Right? So you have more nutrients. Hopefully you're healthier, you live longer. Okay, you also have healthcare. Access to educational opportunities as well. This last point is just a reminder. So a lot of people can feel very upset that if you were to go to, let's say, Pakistan, where I'm from, or Afghanistan, you might see a lot of children working jobs that are very labor intensive, right? A lot of people work with their hands, meaning they, like in parts of Africa, they have open air mines, so people are just working with small hand tools and trying to find, minerals and resources that way. I remember watching a documentary about people who made bricks in Pakistan. So again, these people are working like directly with their hands and whatnot. It's important to remember that 200 years ago, everyone in the world was doing that was industrializing. And so one of the questions that I would ask or consider is that, are some of these steps just necessary that a country has to go through? Like, you can't go from your impoverished state with no infrastructure to highly successful, right? So that would be like, imagine after 10 years of not having a particular sport at a school, let's say basketball, the 11th year there's a team, but somehow the school, the kids themselves organize, they get 15 people together, and with no coach, they win a championship. It's like, you're making a face because it seems pretty unrealistic, right? We're grounded in reality. Maybe if you're a Disney movie, might be possible, right? And not that it's impossible, it's just that, there's gonna be a lot of roadblocks to there. So a lot of things need to advance and start building on one another for that success to be realized to some extent. Okay. Eventually I'll get some case studies in here about China. So I had already mentioned somewhere along in the 70s, China, they opened up their borders and they became a little bit more capitalistic, more open to free trade, which allowed, a few 100 million people to escape poverty and not live below the poverty line, have access to food, nutrition, have access to, luxury goods to some extent. Like, obviously having the variety of clothes that you have for some people would be a luxury good. Access to resources like water or electricity as well. And a lot of that happened because they opened up their country to more free trade. They're more willing to it kind of just shifted their philosophical thinking about, whether or not you should actually have money. Because China's communist, and in communism, people don't have personal private property. It's just things are just owned publicly, which didn't really work out in their case. Okay. Similarly, in Russia, although Russia The Soviet Union, the communist regime kind of fell in 1989, I want to say. And now obviously afterwards they have what's called like an oligarchy, which is just leadership by the wealthiest people. They're not democratic still, like Vladimir Putin's been in government for like 20 years, maybe more, which is significantly longer than you kids have been alive. So they're still not democratic, but people in Russia are perhaps have the opportunity to experience a better quality of life now than they did maybe 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Okay, we'll pause there.